And a perfect person isn't going to walk through because none of us are perfect. We turn to God in our imperfection. And through his mercy and grace and kindness and forgiveness, we become the greatest version of ourselves, not before. So I pray that you're loved and that you know that your Lord deeply sees you and he knows you and he's waiting for you.
Hello, people. Welcome to the community of the Growth Mindset podcast. Guys, if you are a first time listener, don't forget to subscribe on whichever platform you're listening from so that you don't miss on more interesting episodes coming up in following weeks. And for our daily listeners, here we are again with a new episode where we will interview another interesting personality from a unique industry and understand how they were able to accomplish this great level of success. Remember, this is a podcast where we learn easy, practical methods and tips that we can implement in our daily lives from the very best and the most successful people known today. Because as we all know, success leaves clues. And we, the people having the growth mindset, will use these clues to create a better, more fulfilling, and a successful life. So, let the growth begin. Hi, Alva. First thing first, this is Silawath Irshad, and it is a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. So, Helva, for people that might be hearing your message for the first time in India, would you like to give, let's say, a quick introduction about yourself and what you do?
Sure. So in the pandemic year, I wrote the book Secrets of Divine Love. And it was a book that had been on my heart for several years. I guess the full title is Secrets of Divine Love, A Spiritual Journey into the Heart of Islam. And I had no idea what would happen in writing this book, but I just knew I felt this guidance to share it. And to be honest, I thought once I would write this book, my work would be done. I felt guided to write it and I would put it out and my work would be done. But God had different plans. And this book kind of just, it took off in a way that I had definitely could have never expected. And then it just kept getting translated and it started going to every corner of the world. And because of that, it's changed the course of my life into a position of service. And I quickly went from someone who likes to write on the weekends to someone who's always writing. And so, I mean, the path that brought me here, I did study divinity in school and also, ironically enough, business. But I never thought that I would be in the religious studies work. But I think it's just, for me, it's just a reminder that Allah can do whatever he wants of you. That Allah's decree completely overrides what you may imagine. And I often say, when I look at this balance sheet of my life and I see that I have 1 + 1 and it equals 1 million, and I'm wondering what happened. Like, I know my capability. And when I see the outcome, I know that the influence of God in that equation so clearly. From the outside, someone may not know that or see that, but I see it so clearly. And so it's interesting to do a quick introduction, but I feel like who I am now is so much of that comes from a blessing that Allah has placed on me. And I almost imagine for everybody, it's like that. It's just about accessing and seeing that influence in your life. So it's been quite the journey as I write more books and share more. And with every book, the way it lives in the world, it surprises me. Because again, I look at my own capability and the outcome and how it's so vastly different.
Wow. You've said a lot of things just in the introduction, right? And I mean, I'm just trying to kind of identify, like, how did you get into this journey? How did you tap into that self wherein your relationship with God kind of took off, and you really, as you said, you feel him, right? It's a very close relationship. So how did that happen?
Mm. So I was really looking um, to have a relationship with Allah. I had witnessed my parents, growing up. I was born Muslim, and I witnessed my mother and my father practice really beautifully. I mean, the essence of their Islam was in service. So it was not just about praying on a prayer mat, which they did, or fasting. It was about going out into the world and saying, my dad would always say, he'd say, um, you help people, and that's the tax on your blessings. It's
Mm,
like if Allah has given you something, then know that you're responsible to help other people. And I grew up hearing that. I grew up, we'd be going to dinner and then someone would call and we'd end up at a hospital because someone was in need, or at someone's house. Like, that's just how we grew up. Our life was always, because of my parents, infused with this sense of it's not just about you.
mm,
So growing up like that, it has an impact on just how you view the world. And
true.
I would witness my parents and they'd have this beautiful relationship with Allah. And like, I wanted that. And I always felt like I was piggybacking off their relationship. Um, and so, and I kind of touched this briefly in the book introduction, but I actually ended up at a Buddhist monastery, um,
Mhm.
because something in me said, like, I need silence. I need to learn how to silence my mind. And at the time, I actually was not praying. And it was actually interesting and very hysterical in a way, because we'd get up at 5 a.m. to do meditation for an hour.
Yeah.
But I remember dragging my feet to get up for Fajr, at that time. This is a while ago. And it was just such an interesting moment, So I'd wake up, we were meditating, which is just like, the style was just silent, you know. But being in a room of, at the time it was monks and nuns, and meditating, it began to teach me the power of breathing and the breath, and how everything can become silent. And when I left the monastery, I realized that I had experienced the silence, but I was longing for the presence.
Mm,
So in a way, it's kind of like la ilaha. It was like the emptying. And so I began the search of illallah. And so it's a very interesting moment for me. This phrase means so much to me, la ilaha illallah, because I experienced the emptying so clearly, but there was a lack of presence for me. I hadn't been able to then receive illallah. And so in a series of events, coming across a series of different people, I learned how to bring in illallah, or how to just be aware of illallah. And I make sure to say that I don't think God is a form. It's not like something he lives in me or something like that. More so, I mean, be aware of the presence of Allah that encompasses everywhere, as he says in the Quran, from the east to the west. Wherever you turn is my face. Um, so then becoming aware of that. And part of that was when you learn to breathe and be present in your space, you suddenly realize that it's kind of funny, but it's like the presence of God is not far away. He says, I'm closer to you than your jugular vein.
yeah.
So when he feels distant, it's because we're unaware, not because he is far away. Ibn Atala says, you are veiled by God. You're veiled from God due to his proximity, not his distance. Like it's so close to you that you can't, it's like it's almost like God gave you the eyes you see through, but your eyes can't see themselves. So it's like so close to you, but that's why you don't witness it. And I think, so it's been this really beautiful journey of, in every moment, I would say this one thing, which is, if you're longing to have an experience of God's presence, come with a prayer, come with a dua and say, Allah, I want to feel your presence. Go into nature, or near the sea or a mountain, or sit on the earth with the grass and just say, like, I'm here with your creation that is surrendered to you in every moment. That's the thing about the world around us and nature. It's in perpetual worship of Allah. They don't have the free will to turn away. It's we who have that.
Yeah.
So it's sit there and say, like, I'm in communion. There's a mosque everywhere on earth because their nature is in perpetual worship of God. So when you stand and you sit in nature, like, you're in a mosque, you're in a church, you're in a synagogue, wherever Allah's worship, you're there amongst nature. That's what it is. But they're perfect in their worship of God. And so you sit there amongst these beautiful worshipers of Allah and you ask Allah to ground you into the earth. You allow yourself to feel what it feels like for gravity to press you into the earth. You breathe, you feel the sun on your skin, and you ask for Allah's presence to be known. And you keep making that prayer. That's the thing. The path isn't you running out in the world and finding God. It's just being aware that God is wherever you are, because from the east to the west, wherever you turn is his face, which I think is such a gift under Allah.
Yeah. What you're saying, right? I mean, when you think about it, it's something which is very, very deep. And then you're also becoming so self-aware that, there is a reason and why you're here, plus feeling his presence. I think that's the way you will behave once you really get into that zone, thinking that, he's always with you. I think then you behave differently, you talk differently. For people, let's say, who, I mean, if we go ahead and, look at the perception most of the times when people, who are not aware of the message of Islam and what is the teaching of Islam is or are, how would you like to explain it to people that are not properly aware of Islam? How would you like to show what Islam is all about?
That's a beautiful question. I feel like remembering that Islam, even the word, can be kind of translated as surrendering in peace. This Islam, salam, taslim. This word is surrendering in peace. So the path of Islam is the path of experiencing peace. So the creator of the universe comes down and says, not literally, but like in terms of the revelation, sends down this revelation and says, this is how you can live your life if you desire to live in peace. And the path, like in the Quran, it says the only path to God is self-surrender. Meaning, like, it's just kind of, in a way, beautiful. It's essentially saying that the thing that gets in the way between you and Allah is you. So the self. So every place where you're longing to experience peace, but you don't in your inner reality, it's because of the ego, because of the self, because of the lower nafs. And Islam, the teachings, it teaches you how to not eliminate the nafs, actually. It's about transforming it. It teaches you how to transform this ego into one that turns you away from the divine presence to one that turns you toward the divine presence. And when you're facing God, that's the epitome of peace, because he's as-salam, the origin of creation of peace. And so the path of Islam is the path of peace. Every principle and practice along the way is helping you to remove attachments in your life. Like, for example, we talk about, Ramadan, people say, okay, yeah, you have a fast and it's coming up, right? Oh, I got to fast and this, you don't eat from this hour and you don't drink. But really, if you look in the Quran, it says this was the purpose is self-restraint.
Mm.
You fat, the practice is all those things, not the drinking, the water, all that. But the principle is self-restraint. It's teaching you the practice's purpose is the self-restraint. The purpose of prayer, salah, is to turn away from immorality and wrongdoing. So the practice of prayer is to get you to witness what happened in the day and set the intention for what you want to happen between that prayer and the next one.
Wow.
If you don't do that, then your prayer feels robotic. If you don't use it as a moment in the day of self-reflection, because that's really to prevent immorality and wrongdoing. That's the principle. So all these practices, if we get stuck in only the form is important, but if we get stuck in only the form, we don't end up being self-reflective. If we just fast, we don't end up being having self-restraint.
Yeah.
And that's why they often say the sign of a successful Ramadan is how you are the week after. Like, did you learn? Right? Because in the month, there's so much happening. People are at the mosque, Taraweeh, there are extra prayers, extra dhikr. But then it ends and it's like, whew. It almost becomes like people feel like, oh, thank God. Both love it. They love the month. And they're also kind of like, oh, thank God it's over. So I can return back to my life.
Yeah.
But that's not the purpose, So if you see Islam as a path to peace and the practices as meanings, modes to get you to let go of the things that prevent you from reaching peace, which is ultimately comes back to the attachments of the ego. And that's really what La ilaha illallah is that you're essentially saying this money, this job, this wife, this husband, this child, these will not be attachments or idols. So you're saying, La ilaha, there is no God. There is no little God, little g God. There's no God but Allah. So I am actively trying to detach from making this person, this money, this idea, my God.
Wow.
So that's what I would say. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, because oftentimes we say, right, la ilaha illallah. I mean, I think this is one of the secrets in itself that you've just mentioned, as to what exactly it means, right? Like the idols that we just spoke about, our egos, our attachments, and they are not God with a small g, but but the capital G, the God, the Allah, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's deep. I mean, when you actually think about it, to kind of understand that. When we're talking about Ramadan, right? I also recall one of the scholars also saying that Ramadan is also it's like a month where you also, you know, God is kind of teaching you to how to be for the rest of the year, right? How you should be
Mm-hmm.
every single day. That and then that's why every single year we get to that exercise again, so that we can come back to what we were supposed to be, how we should be acting, and how we should be talking to people. Um, Now,
Exactly. That's beautiful.
and then what I really like the fact that how you explained Islam, right? We're talking about when you are connected to the divine source, how at peace you are, as the name suggests, as-salam, the source of peace. The people that are, let's say, not they don't believe in any specific religion or God per se, right? Because obviously it could be because of the environment they are born in. They might not be to blame because of the environment, because of wherever you are headed, the kind of society what trying to condition you. There are multiple reasons as to why someone might not even think about it. But why do you think it is important for people to get aligned or even explore or try looking out for deeper meanings in life?
That's a great question. Well, I feel that I always say I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. um, and the reason I say that is because It's actually a faith choice.
Mm.
Because here's the thing, you can't scientifically go and say, here's the form of God, and
Mm.
so I believe in this form. And you also can't go and say it doesn't exist scientifically. So you're actually making a leap of faith to say there is no God.
Mm.
Now, I think that leap is a lot more of a leap of faith than me as a Muslim or someone as a Christian or Jewish person of the Jewish faith, because when you look around, existence just doesn't add up. Like there's some force beyond like what we've witnessed. Like the calculations just don't add up.
Mm.
So it's like if you're actually looking, it's a more probable thing. I think one scholar, Makhtar Marqoui, he said once, he was talking about Mukhtar, I forget his name actually, but anyways, he was talking about how in the universe, right, everything's about chance, right? Like,
Mm.
what are the chances something would exist? That's how science often talks
Yep.
in terms science talks in. So they look at an Earth like ours and they say, okay, so what are the chances that the particles heated at the particular level they did to create the particular elements they did in the atoms, and for iron to be made, and like everything, if you ever study like Big Bang Theory or quantum physics, you'll
Mm-hmm.
actually see that everything is dependent on in unbelievable, unbelievable small room for error.
Mm-hmm.
In theological and atheist debates, you hear this thing, it's called like the 17 constants of existence. So there's this thing where there's 17 things that had to happen, like 17 direct elements of things, like particular things around the atom and whatever, and like the gravity and all this stuff. And they say that if it's within a human hair of error, if it was within a human hair of error, our world wouldn't exist.
Mm.
And if you think about all of space and like a single human hair, that's
Wow.
a ridiculous, ridiculously small margin of error. And so the scholar was saying, actually, he was saying, so the scientists came and they were like, okay, what would it be for for an Earth like this to be created? So they did
Mm.
calculations, and then they realized that there were trillions of trillions of trillions of trillions of trillion, like an enormous number. It's to the power of number
Mm-hmm.
off in terms of chance. Meaning, like, for example, 1 out of every 1,000 would create this Earth. But the problem is, this universe only has 100.
Mm.
100, let's say part. I'm just trying to simplify.
Yeah.
Let's say part. So it's like, okay, 1 out of every 100 would create, but then, but the probability is 1 out of every 5 million. What,
Wow.
like, what do we
Yeah.
do? Because science is saying that this Earth could never have been made by chance alone, that it
Yeah.
was intentional. So then what happens? This is so, I love science. Then what happens is they say, well, we can't say God, like we can't say there's a, there is a the hand of God or whatever in this.
Mm-hmm.
So they say, then the theory of multiverse comes, which then says, right, it's also, guess what it is? Faith, because
Yeah.
we can't leave our universe. So it's a complete idea of faith. But
Yeah.
what it does for them, right, is that it eliminates this improbable chance of the Earth like ours to be made in the universe. So
Mm.
they say, okay, well, if there are infinite universes, then we don't have to worry about the fact that there isn't a possibility of chance to create the Earth, because there's infinite universes and this happens just to be. So my point being is, it requires a lot of faith to not believe in God, because you constantly have to combat the
Yeah.
impossibilities of this universe, the beauty of this universe. You constantly have to combat that. And so for someone who may not believe in God, or someone who's, or you mentioned, like, how do you live a life why is it important to make meaning out of things is because without the presence of the divine, everything that happens is accident and chance. That means the most difficult moments of your life, the things that you just can't understand. You have nowhere to go but yourself.
Yeah.
And because through the Islamic tradition, we understand that the self that's not transformed does not bring you peace.
Hmm.
It will bring you the exact opposite. So you have nowhere to go but yourself. And that very self untransformed is a cause of chaos.
Yeah.
So to escape the chaos you're in, you're going to a source of chaos. Like
Hmm.
Allah says, everything that's bad comes from, like, what's bad comes from the self and what's good comes from God.
Yeah.
So you're stuck in the whirlwind of yourself. And so when we say, like, the Islamic tradition gives you a pathway of accepting meanings in different points of your life. So, for example, Allah says, when we send you trials, we're trying to distinguish between those who, like,
Yeah.
believe and don't. Like,
True.
it's essentially when you're broken, it gives you the opportunity, the gift of that is to turn to Allah. And in that turning, it detaches you from the things that broke you. So when the world breaks your heart, you don't become bitter, you become a believer.
Yeah. Yep. And, and I think I can typically attest to that because, though I'm born in a Muslim family, there were instances at the beginning. I don't know what was the reason behind me acting that way but there came a point in my life when I was like, maybe God doesn't exist, or maybe that faith in God or the creator actually was no longer there. I was typically converting into an atheist. But I don't know, what just happened to me. And I just actually took my backpack and I traveled for a month alone.
Mm.
And that journey actually changed my life around. And
Mm.
I don't know. I mean, it was like for me, it was a moment of revelation wherein I could actually discover God rather than
Mm.
just being a Muslim, right? A born a Muslim. And I think there's a huge difference between, just being a Muslim and following the rituals versus you actually discovering Islam. And this is something that I tell my friends, my colleagues, and I ask them, right? Like, it's good that you're Muslim or any other religion, but did you actually challenge yourself? Did you actually go to the root of why do you believe in certain
Mm.
thing? What did you challenge yourself? Did you actually ask those tough questions? Like, are you Muslim because you were born just in a Muslim family, or are you, let's say, in a different religion because you were born in that specific religion? But did you actually go ahead and look for the truth? Did you actually do your research? It's quite work, but once I think that's the kind of experience you've had when you went to a monastery and then basically experience
Mm.
things and you had a deeper meaning. And I think when I read your book, I mean, I don't know how to say it, but I could relate to those in a lot of places. I was like, man, and the kind of practices you've added in your book, the physical, practical tips. It's not just about you writing something. There were actually practical exercises that you added in your book, which I did while I was reading it from my terrace, and I could actually feel that presence because end of the day we were practicing breathing, we're calling out the names of Allah, and it was just amazing, right? So, guys, for
Mm.
folks that have not uh, had a look at the book Secrets of Divine Love, please go ahead and get that book. There's another book as well, which I think, Helwa, you recently wrote, right? From Darkness into Light.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Um, well, first of all, I just want to say that your story on how, as a Muslim, you went out and you asked the tough questions and you put yourself out there, which can be scary.
Yep.
I really look up to that because I think as sometimes when a lot of times, actually, I'll say this, a lot of times people are like, oh, are you a revert or convert? And I say, like, no, but I'm curious, why'd you think that? And they're like, oh, because, your message has love. And I'm like, oh, interesting. They're like, with born Muslims, like, you don't really see that. I'm like, interesting. I thought that was a very interesting comment. And I think to your point, it's because sometimes when you're given something from birth, you don't know the value of it.
True.
You don't go out and inquire about it. It's kind of just your way of your reality. You didn't have the same, dark night of the soul around it per se. I mean, some people did. It sounds like I did. It sounds like you did,
Hmm.
but like the value of that is when you come out on the other side of it.
Yeah.
It's just your faith just feels different because it's no longer something that you inherited from your parents or family. It's something that you went out and met,
Yeah.
that you went out and had a relationship with. And actually we say, like, there's a lot of traditions from the Islamic tradition, like a lot of scholars and teachers who say that they're like, don't inherit your faith, go and learn,
Yeah.
go inquire about it, because it puts a completely different relationship
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
it. And so I think that's really amazing. So thank you so much for sharing that. It's just really good. Yeah, so the From Darkness into Light is just a short reflections that I just wanted to share. I wanted to turn to a short form of writing,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Please.
and some share more poetry.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that I hope to do definitely in the next few years, is to do more poetry. And actually, I want to do a spoken word. So it's longer form, 4 or 5 minutes of poetry. Um, and a lot of people say, like, well, why'd you write a poetry book? Like, there are probably other books you want to write, and it's true. But I also, for me, what's been really important is with Secrets of Divine Love, like what I noticed is it ended up creating a whole group of people who started saying, oh, I want to write about my religion, or I want to go study Islam, and
Mm.
I wanted it to be something that I'm hoping someone writes another book and it's a lot better, So I just wanted to open the door and say, like, hey, we can write books on Islam. Like, even with a lot of friends I have that are scholars and imams, like, I asked them, I'm like, why aren't you, even Hamza Yusuf is a question I ask, is, he's been writing books, but he has so much knowledge. It's like, what, like, how do we get books into the market of the Islamic genre
Yeah.
that are like hopefully inspiring,
Yeah.
and true to the tradition? And so it was the same with the poetry. Is I noticed there wasn't a lot of Islamic poetry books.
True.
And so I was like, okay, like, how do we, I'm not saying I'm starting the genre, but hopefully give visibility to the fact that there's a lot of beautiful poets in our community. You go write a book, make it better. It's the same with spoken word. Like, I hear a lot of different traditions have spoken word, but in the Islamic tradition, there's only a few.
Yeah.
And again, it's the same with the children's books. Like, we have some, but how do we? So, like, to me, that's something that I feel passionate about, is creating books in the space where it kind of calls other Muslims or people of even other faiths who can write books that are in the context of the divine. I'm just hoping that that kind of inspires them.
Inshallah.
Um, yeah, inshallah.
I mean, I love the fact around why when you brought up poetry, right? Because historically, if you go back in time, I mean, Islam and poetry had a very deep meaning. When we say poetry, I mean, it's more to do with the divine love and the love for your beloved. Um,
Mm,
well, obviously, when we talk about poetry, the first name that comes to mind is Rumi, right? Jalaluddin Rumi, and his
sure.
life, the kind of poetry he has, and the relationship he had with his master, his teacher.
Mm,
One of the things that, because I want to circle back to the conversation we were having, because I often see this is becoming like a trend in the youngsters today as well, because because of the media, because of the environment we are in, because of the mobile devices we are in, people are often inclined towards them not believing in God. Obviously, because as you mentioned, right, you rightly put it, having faith. And I think science itself has become like a religion today, wherein whatever science kind of says is what we are believing. And again, science has theories, right? And when we
mm,
actually go ahead and get the definition of theory, we actually it is just a theory. It is not something that
mhm,
can be practically proven, right? So there is there are a lot of things that we as youngsters also need to understand, that where are we headed. I mean, who are we allowing to influence? Because end of the day, we are human beings. There are things that can influence us, but becoming aware around what things are influencing us could be key. So I want to ask you, because in your book I did come across around things around self-awareness. So for someone who, let's say, has no idea, maybe he's listening to us for the first time, and he or she does not believe in any religion, they think it's all a hoax and so on and so forth, but they want to begin the journey of self-awareness, how can they
Hmm.
start? Any practical exercises or tips you have?
So there's a practice from the Islamic tradition. It's called muraqabah, but basically it means it's observation, to look
Mm,
at oneself. So one practice that you can really do is at the end of the night, you take stock of your day, which means you'll just sit for a second and you ask yourself two questions. One question is what you felt like you did well today. So it could be, I was kind to my parents. It could be, I got all my work done or homework or whatever it could be that comes up for you in that moment of what you did well. And then the next question is what you'd like to do better or what you could improve on. So maybe like, I lost my temper or whatever it may be. Maybe I watched too much TV, something like that. So then you take a look at that and you're like, I lost my temper. I watched too much TV. So I want to work on that tomorrow.
mm,
So there's a greater awareness over the things that you'd like to shift in your life. And if you did this practice for a couple weeks, you would see themes. You would see you keep coming back maybe with a temper issue, or you find yourself distracted, or whatever it may be. Maybe it's you overate. I don't know, whatever it may be for the person. And so basically, to have more self awareness is to observe yourself more. That's how it begins. Now, if you did this and you start to see those themes, then you start to work on those parts of yourself. Then you start to actively say, you have an intention in the morning. For me, it would be, Allah help me with my anger. Allah help me with I'm getting distracted watching TV, whatever it may be. I'm using that as an example. And so I'm putting that intention for someone who maybe does not believe. Maybe it's just setting the intention of, okay, like today I'm going to focus on really being present with my anger. Okay, so then you try that. Then what ends up happening is eventually someone says like, oh, like I have an anger problem. And then they start to inquire. Then you go out and inquire like, what are tools I can use around my anger? What practices can I use around that quality that I'm struggling with? So maybe if it's distraction, it's taking off social media off your phone. Maybe it's doing a online detox, whatever it is, but you start to then inquire because you start to see how this habit holds you back in life. And as you end up doing, honestly, if as Muslims we did this, it would be really impactful because you start to see that the places in your life where you're you're not acting faithful. You may believe in God. I tell people a lot of times when you read the Quran, don't just automatically assume that when they say believers, God's talking to you.
mm.
And when it says disbelievers, that you don't have to listen. Actually, when you read, be open and honest because sometimes a disbeliever like characteristic would fit you much better.
Yeah,
And sometimes a believer characteristic would fit someone who doesn't believe in God better. Because sometimes our qualities, we haven't refined our qualities, you know? And so I say that because I say, like, I don't look at anyone and think they're more or less because of what they believe in. I personally don't because I believe that God created them. So
yeah,
based on that one fact, I have to be honoring of them.
true.
The creator of existence felt like this world would be incomplete without this person. That's pretty unbelievable. I mean, we look at um, dead stones, meaning golden crown and a jewels in a British museum with such reverence, but we like look down at the guard next to it.
Yeah.
Like, how? This just came from the earth, and there's millions more in the earth. But this human next to it that you pushed or you told you don't get too close, you're gonna disrespect them. The creator of existence decided that they should exist. Like, have we held each other with that honor? And so I say that because if anyone is out there and they follow a different tradition, like in my eyes, you're still worth beyond language. You're on your journey. And I pray to God that you find a path that aligns you and that you find a path to peace. That's my prayer.
Yeah. When you talk about, respecting the person at the other end rather than those material objects that we're referring to here, I can understand because, when I think there was a video that I'd watched wherein the person or the person at the other end was talking about the probability of a person being born, right, out of, I think it was 1 in 4 trillions. I
Wow.
mean, look at the math, 1 in 4 trillion, and that person is alive. And I mean, and then this is the same thing that I think I read in your book, which kind of literally was a different perspective, wherein now we're looking at a person not as just another human being, but being more, because the creator chose to create him, so it definitely has value rather than
Mm-hmm.
comparing it to material objects. Now, one of the
Mm.
other things that typically kind of, and this is something that I always ponder on and I think about, and I think it's good since we are talking here. I thought it'll be a very good to even get your thoughts on this, is possibly the fact that these days the young men and the women, there are a lot of things. I think this is happening more in the US as compared to in India, but I
Mm.
do see the trend uh, will follow here soon. But it's more to do with the gender uh, politics, you could say, or people trying to compare men versus women, and also the fact that oftentimes, uh, when it comes to Islam, people, not all people, but just maybe a minority that kind of target stating, we don't give the rights to women in Islam. Women that follow Islamic tradition are oppressed because probably they wear hijab and so on. You're a Muslim woman, right? What are
Mm.
your thoughts on this?
Mm. That's a great question. I feel I always tell people actually, um, as a woman, I'm actually surprised why more men don't feel like um
Mhm.
that women have a better that women have a better lot in this tradition. Um, because I think that if you actually look at the rights that a law gives men
Mhm.
and women, I would actually almost go on the side of women get a better deal in a lot of ways. Like, for example, even if sometimes people look at inheritance and they say, oh, but the numbers are different. Okay. But whatever a man makes in his inheritance, he then has to spend it on his wife, his kids,
Yeah,
himself, hold the house. Whatever a woman gets, it's 100% hers.
yeah.
She doesn't have to spend one penny on the rent or the house or the food. It's 100% hers. Like, there's this idea, like, I think people don't sometimes understand, like, that is so interesting. We come in an American, I live in America. So in the American context, it's men and women equal, men and women like equal, right? Like, you pay rent, I pay rent. You
Yeah,
do this, I do this. Like, it's really just split down the middle. And people are like, that's great.
yeah.
But like, actually in the Islamic tradition, women are elevated
True.
above men. In America, we always say women 75 cents to the dollar, which means most women make 75 cents for every dollar that a man makes. So there's this disparity of 25%. Men make more, even if they have the same skill set.
Hmm.
And that's in America, where we're so proud of our equality. But actually, when you look at the numbers, it's not real reality. There is a clear distinction and discrimination between. But in Islamic terms, if you look like, even if you look at the word man, woman, right? But it's really womb, man. So it's woman are this
Mm.
is a man essentially, right? With a
Mm.
womb. So it's something more than just man. And the very and people say, well, what if I don't want to have kids, or if I don't have children, am I less worth? It's not about whether you have children or not. It's the fact that God decided to give you this bridge, um, this gateway between the beyond and this life. And you, as a woman, have been given that. Whether or not you choose to bring a child into this life, He's elevated you in that and continues to elevate you in that. And so even in people look at, like, people solely dial into the hijab and they say, that's not fair. But it's like this, but then again, and then in France, people do the exact opposite and they say it's
Yeah.
fair. Meaning they tell you can't wear hijab in the
Yeah.
name of women's rights.
Yeah.
So here's the thing, it's a woman's choice, right? It's her choice to do that. Just as it's ultimately your choice to pray or your choice to fast.
Yeah.
You have free choice. The religion says certain things about those things, but you have the freedom to choose. It's the parts in our tradition, or actually rather cultures, that force people to do things.
Mm.
That's where it's bad. Allah gave you the freedom of choice. And the importance of choice, we haven't, I think, as a Muslim ummah, we haven't really sat with what this means. Choice is giving us the opportunity to be able to choose, which allows for love to exist. I say this briefly in the book, but really what that means is, if I put a gun to your head and tell you you have to love a random person, you can't create love out of nothing. Like, you can't, because I'm coercing you.
Yeah.
You can lie and say, okay, I love them, but you don't, because you didn't get the free choice.
Hmm.
And I think sometimes with this religion, when people don't love it and they have this just kind of aversion to it, I always ask, like, where was their choice taken? Where did they feel like they couldn't choose? So I think even with women and men in this tradition, is part of it is, again, like, Western feminism, which is like a whole topic, comes in and decides what woman should look like, which is inadvertently goes against the theories of standing for women. The real, quote, feminism is to say, you choose what you want to choose. If you want to talk about what feminism is on that side, I'm not saying it's good, bad, or anything in between. I'm just saying it's about choice. And if you take that away and tell someone you have to be what I think is free,
True.
then that's not fair. And I think that's part of the disparity between how men and women are perceived, mostly because of culture. A lot of things that you see in the Middle East, or perhaps in India, perhaps in Pakistan, it's a combination of culture of those regions. It has less to do with the religion.
Yeah.
If you want to understand the religion and the way that women are treated, then you look no further than the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And if you see in his actions anything other than utmost beauty, you won't. That's what you'll see in the way that he treated women and elevated them. So I think that, there's obviously verses and you could get into it. But for me, I to be honest with you, I often think, like, why are men more like, this isn't fair? I often think that. I think it's funny because if you actually look at the tradition, there's a case to be made that women are elevated.
I understand, because this is a topic that I've also kind of thought a lot about, because in Islam, again, that's what I've learned right along the way. What I've discovered so far is that, God has created man and women, but end of the day, they are he has created them equally. It's just that they have different roles, probably, but they are created equally. Like, I mean, one example comes to my mind is one of the stories that I had heard long back around one of the women, like a group of women probably, coming to Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and asking and complaining typically that men get the right to go ahead and, fight in the way of Allah, right? Like jihad, which is
Mm,
the second meaning, which is the lower jihad. Again, I want to bifurcate when people hear the word jihad, it doesn't primarily mean where you just take sword and start fighting, right? The primary
yeah.
meaning of the jihad is the upper jihad, the better jihad is where you fight your own self, your own egos, things within
Mm,
yourself that you think are disregarding you and contradicting and not allowing you to be in sync with God. That's the primary jihad. That's the bigger jihad. Yeah, the
mm,
lower jihad that I was referring to, right, wherein you go and fight. So a group of women come to Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and they say, you know what,
awesome.
yeah, men get the opportunity where they can go to the war zone, they can fight, and they die and they get the, it's a jihad for them. They become a shaheed and so on. But women don't get the right. And I love the fact as to how Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said that, it is also a great jihad for you. Every single thing that you do at home is also a jihad. Now imagine, I mean, like that's a crazy thing in itself when we see the kind of thing that men are doing as well as women are doing, right? Because that too is a jihad now. So I think he's made it so simple and so easy. And this is
Mm,
something that I find it hard to digest when people say, you know, what women at times sometimes do, or at home probably if they want to work, definitely they work, right? There's no stopping in that. Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam wife was a businesswoman, so that's a different story. But if a woman, let's say, decides that she has to work, it's her choice end of the day. But I've also noticed, how can you degrade what a woman does at home, right? Just because someone is doing some sort of job doesn't mean, for example, if a woman is working at home, how can you say that that's not a job? Like, on what scales are you comparing what men do, or let's say they work 8 hours a day at the job versus what a woman does at job is not equal, right? They both have different meanings. They both are difficult in their own ways, right?
mm,
So I mean, this is a kind of notion where I find it difficult, hard to digest, that they're putting one sort of work down versus the one other sort of work up, wherein that's not the case. Where there was also, I think I had heard one of the scholars stating women are like the universities where they make future leaders. They are the people that actually help create man and women, create societies. So I think that's deep when you actually go ahead and think deeper about those lines.
mm. You see with Khadija, the Prophet, peace be upon
Mm-hmm.
him's first wife. I mean, she was a business owner,
Yep.
so there is example, or Aisha, she was
Mm-hmm.
people would come to her as a scholar, as a primary source of hadith. You
Yep.
have examples of these women in different leadership positions, and
Yep.
I think it's interesting as women, at least in the United States, more women go to college than men, you
Yep.
know, um, and they tend to be more educated with higher marks, and so it's not a conversation around the intellect. And I think, one scholar is interesting because in the Quran, Allah talks about the rewards of men, in heaven and certain different aspects of the rewards. And he doesn't necessarily speak directly to women's rewards. And one scholar was saying, which I thought was really amazing, but he said, when Allah is very specific in the Quran, like he understands that, basically half the population is going to be Muslim, is going to be women.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything is intentional. Why would you leave that out? And he's like, for us, we see that as when that happens in this case, is because the rewards of women are so beyond language that what they long for, what they envision for themselves is so much more intricate and different than a man's version of paradise. It's
True.
just, and he was saying that, and he says, so when Allah isn't specific, it's because it's not limited. It's
Hmm.
more expansive. And so I think sometimes, when we read things in the Quran and we're like, oh, that triggers me. Instead of just seeing it as a place where you get to put God on trial, changing the energy and saying, okay, the creator of existence sent this down. There's wisdom in it. The same God who created Mary and,
Yeah.
all these, this is the God who sent this. So let me breathe and let me go ask people of knowledge. Let me inquire in a way of God, show me. I had a teacher once. She said in Ramadan one year, she wanted to know about the verses of the fire and hell. And she said, it's very, it was triggering me to read about hell and the fire and burning. So she said, one Ramadan, I literally set the intention, Allah, I want to understand. I want to understand. I want to have an experience of your love and mercy, since your mercy encompasses all things, in these verses. That was her intention. Very open, very receptive. And she told me at the end of the Ramadan, she got this deep insight, which was that the verses of fire, right, make you go back, right? It makes you kind of lean away, oh my God. It deters you. The fire deters you. And she said, I recognized and realized that the verses of fire were a protection. It was a, it in it was the deepest mercy, but you had to stay long enough in it. You had to almost, it's like when gold, they put gold in fire and it purifies it.
Yeah.
You had to step into that verse. It deters most people. They just kind of read it quickly and run past it. But if you spend time and you let it burn off the impurities, there's deep wisdom in them. And they actually carry some of the deepest mercy in the entire Quran. But most people, it's hidden and deters people with its fire. It's kind of like, the most expensive jewel is behind the most elaborate locks and safes, and so most people run past that because they don't want to face the jalal qualities. And so she gave me this really beautiful insight of, don't go past the verses that trigger you fast. Spend time with them, and then there's a deep wisdom, because usually it's the place of resistance in you. And if you allow it to break that resistance, a totally new reality opens, inshallah.
MashaAllah. It's great when people have this kind of discovery. And I also see, but end of the day, as you mentioned, right, she went with an intention and seeked Allah's help. And then when we make the intention and then we ask for his help and do take the action, and then inshallah, definitely there's something good that can come out of it. I know we are coming to the end of our conversation. There's one last question I want to ask you, right?
Sure.
Possibly for people, let's say, who are young right now, for both men and women, boys and girls, young specifically. So what would your message be to them?
My message would be that regardless of the past you lived, regardless of the things that you've seen, done, heard, experienced, that the path to Allah is open for you. That nothing that could have happened to you would have ever happened except that it opens a path to Allah. That I know that it's hard to not be in control. I know that the uncertainty of this world is hard. I know that you have a lot of thoughts, a lot of feelings, a lot of emotions, and you don't always know where to go with all that. I know that sometimes it feels like your parents don't understand the world that you're living in. And I know it could be frustrating and you could feel like you're alone. But I just want you to know that Allah sees you, that He looks over you, and that He is constantly protecting you and sending His light upon you. That even the things that you feel ashamed about, the things that you feel like you have to hide from the world, Allah sees it, Allah knows it. Allah knows the deepest inner feelings in your heart and the most hidden thoughts in your mind. and he loves you. And the path for purifying your heart and your mind and your spirit, it's not something you do without God. So don't be ashamed of going to him with your sinfulness, with your brokenness, with all the feelings that feels like too much for other people. Allah is the creator of existence. He sends you tears and laughter to turn you back to him. And so there's nothing and no moment that is void of his presence. And if even you feel alone, that you know that he's with you, even when everyone else is gone and the world is asleep and no one is around, God's presence is with you and he loves you, and his mercy encompasses everything. And his forgiveness forgives all sins. That's what he says in the Quran. So just know that no matter what you may feel about yourself in this moment, that Allah is with you and he's waiting for you and his door is open. You don't even need to knock. It's just open. You just have to decide to walk through. And a perfect person isn't going to walk through because none of us are perfect. We turn to God in our imperfection. And through his mercy and grace and kindness and forgiveness, we become the greatest version of ourselves, not before. So I pray that you know that you're loved and that you know that your Lord deeply sees you and he knows you and he's waiting for you.
MashaAllah, I mean, I've done so many interviews so far, and by far this has been the most powerful message I think I've heard and my listeners would hear. I mean, thank you so much, Alba, for taking your time out and joining us on the show.
Thank you so much. It's been such a gift to be with you.
This brings us to the end of this episode, and hope you at least had one takeaway from this interview. If you have any questions or want to talk to me personally, you can find me at www.silawathirshad.com. See you soon.